Godzilla has one of the longest running lifespans of any movie franchise ever, having 38 total films within this series if you count the Netflix anime movies. Only obscure franchises that I personally am not even familiar with have more.
That's a lot of fish.
But as insane as it sounds, this franchise lineup could have been much larger. Dozens of ideas were scrapped over the decades. Some of them were traditional Godzilla stories, others were not. In this video, we will explore an untold Godzilla story that would have had the king of the monsters taking on a terrifying beast, based on a legendary creature from myths and legend that might just surpass the popularity of Godzilla, a werewolf. And not just any old mangy half-breed, one that would grow to epic proportions and become a true kaiju. This is the story, Godzilla versus the Wolfman. This unfinished fan film was directed and produced by Shizuo Nakajima, a man who was once a part of the Toho film production team and worked on projects like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla and Terra of Mechagodzilla, combining his efforts with many other former Toho employees. It's said that over 10 hours of live footage was recorded for this project, yet only about 20 minutes of it has ever been seen, which we're gonna talk about in a little bit, so stay tuned. For the most part, the exact reason why this was attempted to be made outside of Toho is unknown. Before a fan film, it had most of the bells and whistles of a full-on Godzilla movie from the Showa era. According to Nakajima, multiple drafts of the story were thrown around during the 1970s. Apparently, there were even kaiju suits created for the actors by Fuyuki Shinada, a man who would become the costume designer for the eventual Godzilla GMK movie and more Toho projects. Filming for this project finally took place in 1983, and went on for a few years before finally calling it quits. And in that time, they threw together something that was actually kind of interesting, but no less bonkers. If you've seen some of my older videos on this era of Toho Godzilla movies, you know that a lot of those people were tripped out as all hell. The little details we do have is that the story would have started appearing to be more like a classic werewolf monster movie than a kaiju film. The footage and images that have surfaced on this show that the project's creators were going all out on something that no Godzilla movie had done prior. I mean, look at this. This is right up there with some of the freakiest werewolf transitions out there. It does help that they use the old school animatronics and prosthetics, because if this was a CGI scene, it would probably be like a tenth as scary as what it is here, if it was done by CGI. Now after the werewolf would have done werewolf things, eventually the cursed soul would have stumbled across some kaiju baby juice, aka radiation, and would have exploded in size. So let's talk about this werewolf kaiju. I guess it looks like a werewolf, you tell me. At one point, the Wolfman was supposed to have more of that classic half-man, half-wolf appearance, wearing tattered clothes and having clear signs of the human locked within still visible. You can see this is another unfinished short film project, Baragon vs. Wolfman, which was in a sense a pilot for this idea of Godzilla taking on a werewolf creature. But instead of that design, production continued with the beast from Hoth hopped up on kaiju myth, sporting a thick coat of white fur with some gray accents throughout the body. This would have been one of the very few times we've actually seen Godzilla take on a mammalian-based monster not named King Kong. Although that head and that face, that screams more of something like an owl than a wolf to me. You know. Still though, this would have been a freakishly odd-looking kaiju, and you can't deny its uniqueness and design. Give this video a like if you want more mammal-based kaijus, by the way. Now, other than having a face that only a blind mother could love,
ugly motherfucker,
the Wolfman sported a nice set of claws on all of his 4 appendages. Don't ask me about the 5th. Sorry. In terms of powers and abilities, the Wolfman was a simple beast. It would have relied on pure brute force and the use of its deadly claws as giant daggers to attack its enemies. And within the footage, the beast managed to handle a variety of attacks coming from both Godzilla and the military. So the werewolf was durable at the least. We all love Godzilla's roar, right? It's iconic. And the werewolf sounds in this movie might have been as well, but probably in all the wrong reasons. Within the footage, you can hear the placeholder effects that were used for the Wolfman, which were a variety of screeches and growls coming from mountain lions and other big cats around the world. You've heard these noises before, at least once I'm sure. Here, let me play it for you some. But one noise I'll never be able to get out of my head that the Wolfman does is this creepy as all hell breathing sound that the monster makes. I imagine that at the recording studio that day, the director was like,
Okay, so now I want you to make some monstrous breathing noises, please.
Okay, how about this?
No, you're a monster in a heated battle with Godzilla. You need to sound like you're in the heat of combat, okay?
Okay.
That's close, you're getting there. Now just do that, but pretend you're simultaneously trying to breathe, but you can't because there's something blocking your throat. And you just got startled by something that surprised you.
Jesus. Alright, how about this?
Brilliant!
Now back to the story. What would happen next is that Godzilla would eventually show up, going in a different direction from the more silly films of that era that everyone was slowly growing tired of. This movie would have had a more serious tone, and you can see that within the footage that made it out to the public. Godzilla would have been a terrorizing force to humanity, but in this story he would have been the lesser of two evils, and therefore wouldn't be the direct villain in this story, but nonetheless, he was gonna kill people. The footage also showcased some solid military versus kaiju scenes, and while the shots were clearly in a very rough and early state, I believe kaiju genre fans would have been pleased with the humans versus monster element given here in this movie. Now at some point in the story, Godzilla and the Wolfman would have met up somewhere out in the countryside, which the Showa era was notorious for having fights in non-city settings, and I kinda wish these modern Godzilla movies would lean a little bit more towards that as well. And of course, they would have battled. Now with the footage that we get to look at, this fight would have been a whole heck of a lot similar to the OG battle of King Kong versus Godzilla. Some of the shots here are just way too close to be a coincidence. And even the suit used for Godzilla was based on the one from King Kong versus Godzilla. Clearly there was some inspiration there. The face-off would have been brutal, and neither would have come out clean in this fight. But unfortunately, that's where the story ends, at least that I could find. You could assume it would have played out in classic fashion. Epic battle occurs, Godzilla gets beat up a little, makes a dramatic comeback with the help of mankind, and BAM! Dead Wolfman. Although I'm curious to know if they would have had to use something like a giant silver bullet or some other classic werewolf killing weapon to finally put the beast down. That would have been a nice little twist to a kaiju movie, I think. The crazy thing is, according to director Nakajima, there is still a chance that one day the project will actually be completed and released at the very least online. But here we are, 40 years later, and still no sign of that happening. It's safe to say that we're probably never going to see Godzilla vs. the Wolfman completed, and that's a little sad. But if Toho keeps deciding to help these independent creators with their fan projects, I think it's time for them to go say hi to Nakajima while there is still time to pick this man's wild and passionate brain. The idea of the Big G-Man fighting other popular monsters and creatures from big-time franchises will always be something that we like to discuss in this here community. To this day, there's been a whole lot of attempts to get Godzilla against other famous opponents, but other than King Kong and a few of the superheroes in comic books and things like that, we really haven't got to see it. But perhaps one day that will all change and we'll get to see Godzilla take on almost anything and everything, maybe even a big kaiju-sized werewolf. I love the idea of Godzilla taking on a giant werewolf monster. Now tell me what you think. Thank you everyone, I hope you enjoyed that trip down Godzilla memory lane, or maybe you never even heard of the story, so if you didn't hear of it, give the video a big ol' like, share it around to other people that maybe haven't got the chance to learn about the story. I feel like it was a cool project and something that, you know, it didn't get to come to be, but hey, what's available for it is cool enough, and I like the idea of Godzilla taking on, like, you know, more classic horror monsters. So I'm gonna be working on Godzilla vs. Frankenstein next. So, you know, stomp that subscribe button if you haven't already to become a resident of Dangerville. And of course, we got all this other new stuff coming out. So thank you guys for giving me your time today. I will see you in the next one.